Hey, so we have a couple of questions, and I would encourage you to ask questions. We have a fellow student in the class right now who asked a couple of questions. We're going to address those right now. I want you guys to be proactive and ask us questions in between class times. Go to Notion like she did, type it in. We do look for these questions. We want to help you. You have to be proactive in order to have a shot, most successful in this class. So let us know what you're struggling with. The question is this: for some reason, I'm struggling with conventional life estates. Do you have any tips? So those conventional life estate situations are kind of unique. Remember, here's what we're dealing with. Let's see. Remember, a conventional life estate is not inheritable. So it involves a seller or a giver, grantor. Seller sells or sells to a buyer and might say to them, look, I'm not going to sell it to you forever and ever. I'm only going to sell it to you under this condition. It might be a situation like this. I actually heard of this situation that happened in real life. It was a young farmer. His property backed up to an older farmer. And that older farmer really liked this guy. The younger farmer took good care of him. The older farmer didn't have any kids. He and his wife didn't have kids. So the younger farmer neighbor kind of took care of him, and they just got along great. The older farmer retired from the business, but instead of selling his property, he granted it to his younger farmer neighbor. Let's call the seller Phil, and let's call the buyer Tom. That's the younger farmer, right? So Phil's the one who's getting out of the business. He's retiring. Tom is the one that he's granting the property to. Phil also, he and his wife have a passion for a certain charity. Let's just say it's the Boys and Girls Club of North Carolina. So first, Phil and his wife say, hey, Tom, we're going to let you have our property, our 50 acres. You can add to yours. You can farm it and work it for as long as you live. Now, the good news for Tom was he was only 30 years old at the time. So he hopefully, and as it turned out, in fact, did have a long life during which he could use this property. He was 30 years old. He lived till he was like 85. So for 56 years, he had the use of this property. What happened, though? When Tom died at 86 years old, the property went away from his estate. The kids Tom had, in the meantime, they did not get the property because he couldn't leave it to them, because all he had was a conventional life estate. He was both the life tenant and the measuring life. So it was his lifespan that it depended upon. So when he died, it did not go to his kids. Did not go to Tom's kids. Oh no, it went to somebody Phil chose, the Boys and Girls Club of North Carolina. That's who Phil and his wife chose as the remainderman back when he gave the property to Tom. He wanted Tom to be able to use it while he was alive. He wasn't interested in Tom having it to the extent of being able to give it to his heirs down the road. So that might be an example you could maybe that helps you put it in perspective to kind of see how it would work, why it might be set up this way. Let's look at the other question. The other question was, in the recording contracts section, contracts are not recorded, but deeds are. Is this correct? So if you remember, non-essential elements of a deed, things that probably are a good idea are in the deed, but not required. Include it that it is dated, that it is witnessed, that it is recorded. So that's what we're talking about. Why is it that the deed is not required to be recorded, but it is, for one thing? Well, let's look at your book. On page 77 of your book, top of the page, talks about the non-essential elements, and you see it says the purpose of recording the deed, also known as registering the document on public record, making it available for the entire world to see, is to protect the grantee's title. The grantee is the one that the deed is going to, the one that's buying the property. This protection of the grantee's title, their ownership of the deed of the property, this protection is provided by this legal term called constructive notice. It means that the whole world is bound by the knowledge of the existence of the conveyance of the title. The whole world knows that seller gave it or sold it to this buyer, and the buyer is now the owner. So therefore, they're protected. It's on record that they are the owner. Nobody can come in. No other person could come in. Some scam artist can come in and say, hey, I also own it. I own half of it. I want half of it. It protects that buyer from a third party coming in and laying claim to ownership because it's on public record as that seller sold it to that buyer and that buyer alone, not anyone else. Does that make more sense? Keeps that buyer from having to worry that some bad guy is going to come along and claim that they also own it. So all the world is bound by knowledge of the existence of the conveyance of title. When you see conveyance of title, that just means purchase. The title went from seller to buyer. It could be a gift, by the way, but this title, the ownership of the property, is going from the owner to the new owner. And the fact that the title is now vested in the grantee, this protection is against everyone, including subsequent purchasers of the same property from the same grantor. So in other words, the deed is going from the seller to the buyer, and it's put on public record so no one else can come along and claim that they own it too. Protects that grantee. Why might contracts not be recorded? Here is a modern North Carolina offer to purchase and contract. We're going to send you a PDF of this so that you can look around at it. Get a good feel for what it involves. So, offer to purchase and contract. First of all, notice up here at the top, it's 15 pages long. The deed is recorded at the courthouse to be put on public record so everybody knows that a certain seller sold it to a certain buyer. That's all that's needed, because the purpose of it is to protect that new buyer against another person who's fraudulently claiming to also own it. It's not necessary for the entire contract to be recorded. That has way too many details that aren't even needed, because all we're trying to accomplish by recording a deed is to keep a unscrupulous person from claiming that they own property that they really don't, making sure that that new actual buyer is actually the only and the new owner. So we don't need to. There's no purpose in having the contract recorded. I hope that makes sense. But look at this contract. We have the seller is identified, obviously. The buyer is identified. The property is identified in both couple of different ways. The street address is put in there. Remember, the street address is informal. It's not a legal description, but we still use it. Here's where the legal description goes. And if we have this information, whatever information we have, we need to put in here. A lot and a block number. These parts are not legal descriptions like the PIN, the PIN number that's basically the tax parcel ID number, PID. There's a place for it. And if you actually do have that number, you should put it in to the contract, but it is not a legal description. Some or all of the property may be described in deed book and page number right here too. So lots of ways to describe exactly the property that is being purchased. And then down here we have the money. We have the price paid and some other stuff that we'll learn about later, the deposits. We also have things about the earnest money deposit and who's going to hold that. It might be the attorney is holding that money. It's a deposit. The due diligence period of time during which the buyer can have inspections. Also the amount of money that the due diligence will be. That was earlier on page 1. And then here's the date the closing is going to happen. The settlement is going to happen. And then subsequently after the settlement, the closing will happen. We'll learn the difference when we get to chapter 9. But look, it's just a ton of information. By the way, look, here are all the fixtures. Remember we learned about fixtures in the actual real world, in the wild contract, which is called, if you look right here, Standard Form 2T. In this contract, these are fixtures. Remember we learned IRMA was the acronym for fixtures? Well, that's still true, but in the actual real world contract, they've given us 2 columns of bullet points of what is a fixture, just to eliminate controversy. And as we continue on down, we see all kinds of things about repairs, and then the buyer's loan, if they're going to get a loan or if they're going to pay cash, what kinds of financing, and have they seen the property disclosure? That's what this part is talking about. What are their obligations, and what costs are they responsible for, and what are the seller's obligations? It's just going on and on and on. All of this would not be necessary to put in the public record to record it. The only reason to put in the public record any documentation about a transaction in real estate is to go on record so everybody knows who the real owner is, who the actual buyer should be. In fact, the Connor Act says in order to protect a person against third-party claims of ownership, the deed must be recorded. In order to protect against third-party claims, someone, let's just say the seller has owned the property forever and they want to sell it to a certain buyer, and they try to do it, but then some long-lost brother comes out of the woodwork and says, oh, wait a minute, I own 10% of that property. You can't sell it without my permission. It's that idea, to protect against somebody. And if it's somebody just trying to do that untruthfully, the purpose of recording a deed is to make sure it's very clear who that seller sold the property to. And don't forget, the only person that signs the deed is the seller signing it over to the buyer. Buyer doesn't have to sign the deed. They don't sign it. You won't find a deed, a signature on a deed from the buyer. Let me show you an example of a deed. You can put in any town and or city and register of deeds. It's funny. This is my hometown. I actually know this gentleman, the one who happened to be in the register of deeds. He's a local attorney, and he called me just last week to do some stuff for him. And here's a deed from 1997. It's obviously a poor copy of it, but you can still read it. It's what we'll learn on the next time we're together is what kinds of deeds, what are the different kinds. This one is a general warranty deed. It's the best kind, by the way. It has 5 levels of protection. We'll learn what that means later. But this was made on the 16th day of December, 1997, between William F. Morgan and wife, and then Tommy Barbie and some other folks. It's got the grantor in consideration of a gift unto the grantee, the receipt of which is acknowledged, blah, blah, blah. And look at this. Here is the legal description in the form of the meets and bounds description. Perfect. Look at this. Beginning at a nail set in the center line of U.S. Highway 601. A corner of Morgan, lying at north 2035-49 east 64.48 feet from the USGS monument, whatever that even means, right? It talks about to a nail set a new corner. Yeah, you can tell this has been a while. And it just goes through the whole list and then comes back around to the beginning again. The grantor covenants with the grantee that the grantor is seized of the premises in fee simple. That's a lot of old school legal jargon. It's a fee simple ownership. Has the right to convey the same in fee simple, and that the title is marketable. That means good and clear. Free and clear of all liens and encumbrances. He's selling them a good property, or he did back in 97. And that the grantor will warrant and defend the title against the lawful claims of all persons whomsoever. And there's a couple of things. There's a seal, which we know is not essential, but it's there. There's a book number, 2046. There's a page in that book number. So page 200 of book 2046. If you went to the courthouse in Cabarrus County, looked up book 2046 in the Register of Deeds and turned it to page 200, you'd see this same document. Thankfully, we don't have to do that. Look, it's interesting. They scratched through the word Cabarrus and wrote Mecklenburg. Not sure. Oh, because that's the notary public. The notary public who witnessed this signature was not a notary for Cabarrus. They were a notary for Mecklenburg, so they just scratched it through. And that's it. That's the deed. And that's pretty much what they all look like. They're very simple. They're usually just a page or two. Not at all like that 15-page contract we just saw, because the only point of the deed is to tell who sold it and who bought it. And then look, William and Helen Morgan, let's see if they are the ones indeed who signed it. Yes, they are. Right there at the bottom of the first page. That's who signed it. We don't see the buyer's signature because it's not who signs it. Buyer doesn't need to sign it. And that's it. I hope that maybe makes some more sense. So I hope that helps. Let me know if it doesn't. Let me know if that caused you more questions or if that cleared it up. And I'm glad to answer anything else. You just let me know along the way. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Take care.